Kyle here from All Media Reviews. Been meaning to do videos, but I haven't been able to for various reasons, unfortunately, health related things. Not so much mine, but anyway. Um, but I hope to get back to that. And then I posted the big playlist that I'm still adding to it, and I want to do a video about that, but I can't do that. I'm not gonna do that today. Um, but I just wanted to chime in and talk about learning of the loss, the passing of one Brian Wilson. Of course, it's sad to see. And of course, we lost Sly Stone just 2 days ago. I just saw the documentary a few months ago about him too. Also, really sad to see. Brian Wilson has the same birthday as me. My birthday is coming up on the 20th. He was born like 3 days before my dad. But so he would have been, yeah, he would have been 83 in a little over a week. But he kind of was like suffering, I think, from dementia the last several years. So it's not like he was like regularly active. Though I saw a documentary that was on PBS. I don't know if it had been previously like in theaters at festivals or something, but it was done. I want to say I probably saw it after COVID. I want to say it was like 2021. It was it was from footage probably from the 2010s, but he was still there somewhat. Um, It was probably a little bit around the time or a little bit after the making of Love and Mercy, the John Cusack and Paul Dano movie that came out. And what's his name? Giamatti. Paul Giamatti. Yeah. Um, but yeah, it was interesting. He just was talking about. I didn't do a review of it. His music, just like inspiration, his experiences. They've done. They've done a lot of specials on him. He's been documented, but I guess I would be up. It's sad to see, in my experience with his music and the Beach Boys and sort of um learning about it. The I knew about the Beach Boys growing up. Of course, Kokomo was like a hit when I was a kid. But I didn't know. I knew the Beach Boys, mostly the early stuff, the teeny bopper, hits mostly. When I was a kid. I used to listen to the oldies channel, 6:30 a.m. mostly. I don't know if it wasn't WDGY. It was like I forget the name of the call letters was it. Anyway, and like when Stand By Me came out, I was getting into a lot of 50s and 60s music at that point. So I knew that, but I didn't know the lore and a lot of the sort of the sort of his life path, the circumstances of events and everything with the stuff that happened with them and the Beatles in the '60s. I didn't know any of that stuff, and I didn't know. I knew the song "Good Vibrations," but I didn't know the backstory with it. So, but and even like getting into Marillion, I didn't know. Cannibal Surf Babe was a reference to Brian, I believe, and believed to be. I didn't know at the time. That's how little knowledge I really had of his story. Um, I knew parts of it. I knew he was a renowned, and I knew there was some like the history of the Beach Boys. I didn't even know the history of his brother's fates and everything either, unfortunately. Because I just knew like I Get Around and um, what was it? Fun, 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 and those hits, and of course California Girls and Surfing USA. Those songs especially is most, which I think I traced those mostly to the Mike Love driven and the father somewhat. Um, but then I would say, yeah, around 2004, there's all this discussion online about, he's going to release Smile, and I didn't know the backstory of Smile even, or even about Smiley Smile, and I was all getting hyped because that was the long-awaited time for me to finally see Marillion live. They finally came to the U.S. again after waiting. '97. I didn't have the money to go see them. Barely knew about the tour then. And Brian Wilson's gonna release Smile in September, and he's gonna bring his tour with this orchestra to Minneapolis. I found out probably like I want to say less than a week. I already planned to go to Chicago to see Marillion. I had planned to go to see Pain of Salvation in Atlanta to see the B performance with it wasn't with the performance, but it was they're releasing B around the same time rather. But that was with an orchestra, and the performance that was from the year before. But that's a little connected. But that was in September, and actually Dream Theater and Yes played at Target Center. Dream Theater playing at Target Center for the first time ever, a bigger venue than a theater. And this thing with Brian Wilson, I'm like, my friend John was talking about, people in the message board talking about, it's like, so I decided to go. It was September 30th, 2004. I saw him really in like October 2nd. It was like 2 or 3 days before, and I decided to go on a whim, and it was fantastic. Of course, I got the CD, and then kind of learned a lot about the back score. I knew they have Good Vibrations on here, but um, and I wrote about it in my live journal at the time. I was like, couldn't believe I didn't know about this. Very chamber-esque, very it's like a suite, very conceptual at points. And then I did my due diligence and research with it and reading about a lot of the accounts of everything about how this album was supposed to come out, or as I have here, this is the box set. This album was supposed to come out as a response to, it wasn't actually a response to Sergeant Pepper's. It was really a response to, they did Good Vibrations as a response to Revolver, and because Pet Sounds had come out before Revolver, but then then it was taking Brian so long, he never, the whole adage, the whole story that's been told many times, and he had like a panic attack or a nervous breakdown and wouldn't go anywhere for months, because couldn't understand how he could put out something as good, if not better, than Revolver was. And then when the Beatles put out Sergeant Pepper's, it was like pretty much killed it. So then they released, well, see, Good Vibrations had already come out, but they eventually released Smiley Smile, which at the time when I discovered Smiley Smile around that time, 2004, 2005, 2000. I remember what year I found a copy on CD at Cheapo. I have that, or I didn't grab it. I should have grabbed it, but probably under the bees. Um, and it's an abridged version, and there are different versions and all this stuff. And why it didn't, besides him going through the nervous breakdown. And of course, after, before Pet Sounds, he stopped touring with them and stuff. And I didn't know about that, but I came to learn about that. So he was like a studio hound, and his hero was Phil Spector and the Wall of Sound thing. And his theory is, I want to spend the time doing the writing, the composing in the studio while you guys can go off and play the live shows. I'll write the music, because he was the one who was writing it after, like, his father was pretty much. He was the oldest of course, of the brothers, but his father was very demanding and hard on all three of them, including him. It's kind of like getting out from under that whole sort of control, or forceful control of their lives and their music, the way their music was done. But yeah, then I came to learn, well, Smiley Smile is not much. So then I came to learn about, it's like, well, this is great. That show was fantastic. Um, but when this came out in 2011, he was like, well, this is the definitive one. This has, of course, the other two Wilson brothers. So, I don't know. I haven't listened to this in a long time, and I haven't listened to this. I did find on YouTube a restored in 4K live performance from literally 4 days, 3 or 4 days before. It was like 4 days in LA with Van Dyke Parks, of the Smile performance with this orchestra, or group of musicians from Sweden, actually. And Van Dyke Parks was actually in the audience. I was looking at the credits they show at the end of the performance got put on YouTube. And Van Dyke, he co-wrote like most of the songs on here, so I'm not surprised by that. But it also got me thinking a little bit about, it's Brian Wilson's life. Of course, he had the Wilson, the daughter that did Wilson Phillips, but his legacy, his influence, and sort of what happened with him. It's portrayed in Love and Mercy. The other thing I talked about a couple months ago when I was doing those independent film reviews. This movie, Whale Music. Well, there's no like obvious like references or lyrics, or he's not mentioned by name in it, but the depiction in this is very much, very very highly influenced of the main character Maury Chaykin plays in this movie. Rest in peace, Maury Chaykin, Canadian actor, of Brian Wilson, where he had these pop hits with his brother in this, like, in the 60s, and then he kind of lost it, for various reasons, and he became like a recluse, almost a hermit, but he had gold records on his wall and stuff, and memories of his brothers and stuff like that. But um, and it's portrayed in Love and Mercy. And John Cusack was just here, doing an appearance for a screening of High Fidelity at Uptown Theater. I was just watching some footage from Jake Root on Instagram. Although Jake Rude couldn't help but talking about and tuning his own horn a little bit too much, but barely recognized him. But they're talking about Punk, and we're talking about the Beach Boys or Brian Wilson. Unfortunately, in the Q&A, the little section that was shared by Jake, but Love and Mercy is a great film. I implore anyone who loves Love and Mercy to also watch this, even though this is not a fictional bio like a pick movie that's based on Brian Wilson's life. It's just taking a lot of inspiration from his experience, but when of course in Love and Mercy with Paul Dano as the younger Brian Wilson, it shows what happens to him um when he's going different places, musically and using some level of psychedelics and stuff like that. And he was discovering things he couldn't think he could, like, sounds as colors, that kind of stuff, synesthesia and other things that would take him. um, you listen to Smile, and or what would have been Smile Sessions, and the whole thing about that whole thing is, what if this had actually been released in like 67, when it would have come out. I don't know if from a commercial viability standpoint it would have done the same things that Sergeant Pepper's did, but I think from an influence on music, on musicians, even where music went, it might have had some subtle differences. Although, even because you had Smiley Smile, you had Good Vibrations, you obviously even had Pet Sounds, that influence was still felt largely. But it does kind of make it's like you also wonder, well, did Brian Wilson sort of did he compromise his health to some degree? He just didn't know. People didn't know what they were dealing with some of the stuff they were trying in the 60s and LSD or whatever else. Um, but did he for the sake of art? Because that was some of the way portrayed in the movie. Now, some of it was based on his like motivation for trying different drugs that it'll bring me, inspiration or ability to come up with music that I wouldn't be able to. Did he? But it's one of those weird like parallel universe things you kind of wonder about. But his influence though is on been on so many musicians I enjoy, from from the Jellyfish guys, even Andy Partridge, I'm sure, to some degree with XTC, the XTC guys, to especially in the last 35, 40 years, the likes of the Jellyfish guys, and Pure John Courtney from Pure Reason Evolution did a thesis of Brian Wilson's a genius, and Casey Crescenzo of the Deer Hunter, while he's highly influenced by several musicians, like your Jimi Hendrixes and your Beatles, of course, Lennon, McCartney. Um, those early The Deer Hunter records have several Beach Boys harmonies, especially among other things that have the influences in there. Um, it's yeah, he's like super super important. Um, and while his health has been so waning, I mean, the last few years, and people have known about that. People have known about that really since the 70s. It's like there's a video that's narrated by AI talk about when he got together with supposedly with Nicky Dolenz of the Monkees and John Lennon, and they didn't really do anything. They just sat around. They were just basically experimenting. They didn't do any music really. But he was already far gone at that point. I think he probably had some level of recovery, because you watch him in interviews and stuff, even the difference, some of his stuff from like the 90s and 2000s from some of the stuff in the 70s. Some of the he was like on like Johnny, like the Tonight Show, or one of those shows, maybe Dick Cavett, I forget which one, where he just, I mean, not like he's totally lost it, but his speech is slurred, and he kind of didn't answer the questions fully like you might think. Um, Even why he left the whole ensemble, and then everything with the sort of conflicting relations within the band, especially with Mike Love, unfortunately. Um, I don't know about his brother. It's a shame about what happened to his brothers, but his brothers were sort of also product of the industry and certain pitfalls. But Carl passed away. I want to say it was like early 90s maybe, but he had a condition. But what happened to Dennis was tragic. He was really young. It was in the 70s. He has the one soul album, but um he's up there with his brothers writing those harmonies, I guess, up in the heavens and stuff. But it's sad to see, but in some ways it's kind of a relief because he's sort of been. I don't know. I don't. I hope it's not, it wasn't this sort of situation and it could still become this way, like with Michael Nesmith and the Zappa estate. With I was looking about what he was worth, supposedly like around 100 mil or whatever, but um, that documentary, he was still there, but I don't. I think the last few years, if he really was experiencing what full on, I think it was dementia. My apologies if that's not correct, but I think it was dementia. Then it's probably good that he's at peace to some degree. But that documentary was he was still there somewhat, and then you watch some of the footage. I want to say it was on the Love and Mercy DVD I saw. Maybe it was like a special they did on like CBS This Morning or something like that, 60 Minutes. They showed him at some of the filming of Love and Mercy with, I think it was with John Cusack, but he was pretty sharp still. So my impression is that he was able to obviously tour a little bit like what happened with Glenn Campbell. It also kind of made me wonder about not just Glenn Campbell, but like on this and Pet Sounds, where they had the Phil Spector Wall of Sound, like the Wrecking Crew. Was Campbell on this or on this or on not this rather? That was his band, but was Campbell part of the Wrecking Crew on this? I want to say like your Carol Kays and Hal Blaine's and the other people of the Wrecking Crew on this somewhat, but I don't know. I know the guys from Used Been Radio years ago talked about they're big Brian Wilson and Beach Boys fans. People that fan of the Beach Boys, that they would find bootlegs of recordings that basically a lot of this stuff was, um, and like sort of piece together what they believe would be Smile for years. This happened like throughout like maybe in the 80s, 70s, and 80s maybe, you know, um, and how this came out and how this version came out might not have been identical, but from a track list standpoint. But I mean, you just think about this album though. It's so like ahead of its time in a way. I mean, it has similarities. Some things in Pet Sounds you can see, some things you can see in like Revolver and some of the other albums, but it was ahead of its time, and that's why. And it's a concept album to some degree. I don't know the exact concept, but like spirituality and like the universe and energy. I don't know. And like metaphysics, but from a texture and arrangement standpoint, it was so different. I could see why people were so like all fussed about this thing not coming out because it could have, from an influence standpoint. Again, I think that Sergeant Pepper was maybe a little more viable commercially because this kind of goes in places that you're not your average like pop fan, even though that was 1966, 67 when people didn't know, you know, what they really would like. So who knows? I guess that's a little ambiguous, but my thought is that given you had the Smiley Smile and you had Good Vibrations, of course, and of course you had Surfs Up, which came out later. So some of that stuff was available, but not in the context of this whole thing with all these other pieces and suites and little instrumentations with the whistles and different percussion and it might have still influenced some stuff. Like we had your concept albums and Wall of Sound, compositions and stuff. Might have done more, and I don't know in the last 20 some odd years since this came out, people got to finally hear it in its entirety, or you want to go by the bootlegs, how much of a difference, but I think from a musician standpoint, even from teaching music, teaching songwriting and writing, studio recording and stuff like that, if this would have come out when it was supposed to come out, it still would have altered the course of what happened. Some music may have come out a little different. I don't know. I will say there's certain bands like, who is it? There was a band called Explorers Club, not the John Petrucci collaborative thing with Trent Gardner he's from Magellan, but there was a band totally ripped off certain parts of that. I want to say on Wind Chimes, and even Animal Collective. Everyone like to say, "Oh, Animal Collective are modern day Beach Boys." Yeah, whatever. No, and they can't sing the way the Beach Boys and could write even harmonies as good. But certain bands seem to like almost lift parts of it. Jellyfish. I'll have to say, Sabrina Paste and Plato kind of borrowed from. I want to say the beginning of with the little harpsichord. Um, it wasn't. It was. I want to say it was in the third movement. Not vegetable. Maybe vegetables. Um, but I know it's inspiring, and he's inspiring still. I think Brian Wilson, even though he died at a later age, everything that happened, he still kind of reached a lot of people the last few decades since I've been into him. He's going to be seen kind of like your Elvises, and I mean he has been, but I think his legacy on music and studio recording, Steven Wilson was a big fan too, will be felt for a long time. I mean, he's not going to be like the inventor of things, but his sort of, yeah, I mean, he really kind of opened up, the floodgates for some of that stuff, and I think, people will talk. This is what you can do if you want to add all these different tracks and different textures. It's not just guitar, drum, and bass. You can make pop music that has more to it. So, so that's my spin. I don't know. I kind of feel like going in and like doing a comparison because I know that's the modern debate of, well, which one actually is better. These aren't really just demos in effect. These are the Smile sessions, but this was a completely sort of fixed work. I mean, this whole thing is just, it's like 4 discs or something like that. But you got the Beach Boys on this, and this was recorded in 1966, 67, and just remastered. I don't know. I think your push comes to stuff. Most fans probably lean toward this because it's the genuine article, whereas this is a re-recording of it. But this was fantastic when I had heard it, and I think a lot of people loved it when they heard it because we finally got a fully mastered, produced version of Smiles. So, but yeah, but thank you for watching. Again, if you liked Love and Mercy, seek this out. I don't know if it's on any of the streaming networks. Maybe you can just find a DVD or Blu-ray if it's on Blu-ray. It's called Whale Music. Granted, it's not an exact like biopic, adaptation, but it's very sort of the story of, what's his name? I forget the character's name. Desmond Howell. Very much is channeling a lot of what Brian Wilson went through. It's a shame. I always felt sympathy for Brian Wilson. Everything with that manager that was so abusive. Um, Everything what he went through. He was kind of. I mean, he wasn't a martyr because but he was always a sympathetic character as opposed to like the other side of the camp with Mike Love, and some people don't really care about that. But just what happened with, he got so influenced by, chemicals and everything like that, and what could have been, throughout the 70s. Who knows with his recording career, but maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe this was meant to be, and we got the genius that was Smile and Pet Sounds for that matter, beyond the sort of 3-minute pop songs about girls and cars and sitting on the beach influenced by Elvis. So, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.